Thank you to the members of the Women's Committee. What a treat it has been over time to act as staff to that committee. All the good things that you've done. Um, Also, thank you to John McDowell, who's been such a supporter of the university and a good colleague and friend of mine along the way. Special thanks as well to Dr. Annie Sugar from the Boulder campus, who's up monitoring what I'm saying and what comes up behind me, whose collaboration with me resulted in polish, needed cleaning up, lots of our laughter along the way. So, why Stages of a Career title for this address and for the symposium itself? I have had the good fortune of meeting with a number of you to talk about your job and your aspirations at different stages for different reasons: planning, empathy, primal scream, from me, a little push. Earlier this year, I focused on what leader competency and related development look like on the CU Boulder campus and their pipeline of positions that go from independent contributor to the chancellor role. And Annie and I are going to cover that a little later today in one of the workshops about the research and do a little personalized planning with those of you who want to join us later this morning. What I'd like you to do now, as I talk, is to think about yourself. What resonates? Where are you in your career? What can you begin to do or do differently at this stage in preparation for the next? My words shouldn't be simply autobiographical as I talk about the stages of my career. I want them to spark your imagination of what's possible for you. So first, who am I? I'm a heterosexual woman of white privilege with English and Cherokee ancestors. I was the third and last child of John and Hazel Snow, who were born and raised on farms in southwest Kentucky, but relocated to Detroit, Michigan during World War II to work in the plants supporting the war effort. My father, born in 1902, was a skilled tradesman, too poor to go to college, but he was able to do trigonometry in his head and speak and read Greek and Latin. My mother was born in 1912, and she was a licensed teacher for Murray State Teachers College. She taught in the iconic one-room country schoolhouse, rode a mule to work. Once in Michigan, though, she became a postal worker after I was born. That job paid better than teaching. Nothing new there, it seems. My parents and two sisters and I were high school valedictorians. As the youngest, and now you have to say, oh, wait till you see the other ones, you won't say that. As the youngest and the first to attend university, expectations for my success were high. Performance was a given, and as well as perfection. And the need for it has figured prominently in my career. I read and read and read biographies of talented women like Madame Marie Curie, fictional mysteries depicting girls and young women as detectives, which are my favorite. I sang, I played the piano and the zither, I lettered in debate and choir, played half-court basketball, and was the local brain. Junior high and high school were in a bedroom community of Detroit. It was blue collar with white and a few Hispanic students. My class was the first of the baby boomers whose Depression-era parents couldn't afford college for themselves, and they wanted more for us. I was in, I think, the second tier of popularity at the school. Too book smart, too naive, and a non-dancer to be in the top group. Oddly enough, though, being considered a smart child of smart parents marked me for leadership. I cannot remember a time after the fourth grade when I wasn't heading up some project or group. One moment stands out as having an early and lasting effect on my worldview. And I would call that a signal or an aha event. In the ninth grade, on the last day of class, my biology teacher dispensed final words of wisdom. To set the stage, he was young and gorgeous, and we girls all had crushes on him. We would have listened adoringly to him reciting the alphabet. He said something like, "You've been on the top of the student heap this year in junior high, but next year in high school, you'll be back to the bottom. You'll want the older kids to like you. They may ask you to do something with them or for them that will change your life forever, and not for the better. Be your own person. Do the right thing for yourself." I took his words to heart. So being a brain and a non-dancer in the 1960s rock and roll world, I already was an oddity. It wasn't a big step to conclude that I wasn't going to follow the female stereotype of the time of marriage, many children, K-12 teaching or nursing. Not that there's anything wrong with that. They were the only choices at the time. I would do something else and be quite wonderful at it, like those girl detectives or Nobel Prize-winning Madame Curie. I was unconsciously building a feminist leader identity. In 1964, I went to Michigan State University, so you can now calculate my age, if you haven't done that already. Majoring in management within the business school. I was one of 2 women in the business school, and the other one was in secretarial science. Not much leadership opportunity there. I was just treading water to be relevant. As a freshman, however, I did join a sorority. It was failing, but I didn't know that until the following year when, as a sophomore, I was elected its president and reorganized it to full membership. I can remember the exhilaration I felt as a leader, standing before young women and speaking passionately about becoming part of something new and vital. A social sorority, yeah, a little shallow, but it was still heady stuff for a 19-year-old. So what was going on in the world at that time? The 1964 presidential election, which featured a perceived radical, Barry Goldwater, who lost to Lyndon Johnson. Passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, of which I was taught nothing. Early anti-Vietnam War protests, of which I was ignorant. Establishment in 1966 of the National Organization of Women, for Women, about which I heard little talk. I graduated in 3 years and moved to Detroit in 1967, the year of major racial unrest being manifested across the country, including the Motor City. I was young, invincible, and newly awakened to issues of segregation in the workplace and in housing, and of the role of women in society. But I never marched in protest. Instead, I advocated behind the scenes, then as now, for change in whom and how we hire, pay, promote, and develop our employees. Seeing disparity led me to a career in human resources management. In 1972, a key judicial decision paved the way for major change in corporate America and in its universities. Executive Order 11246 went into effect. How many of you have ever heard of it? Oh, 3. Okay. I lived it. The executive order issued back in 1965 followed the Civil Rights Act, and it prohibited employment discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, or national origin. In 1968, the executive order was amended to include gender as a protected class. And then in 2014, sexual orientation and gender identity were added. Still in effect, the executive order requires an annual workforce analysis and an affirmative action plan with goals and timetables to recruit, develop, and promote women and ethnic minorities for positions where they have been underutilized relative to their existence in the recruiting pool. This is where the notion of quotas began, although it's an erroneous interpretation. Legal challenges ensued, but the executive order was upheld in 1971. So reporting had to begin. For many of you today, this requirement started to open career doors. And for you who are younger, you have benefited from this single requirement. Ford Motor Company, a significant federal, and this is one of those you go, oh gosh, look. This is my company picture. Pink scarf, green and white check. Yeah, it was very 1970s. Ford Motor Company, a significant federal contractor, responded to the executive order by hiring me. And what an interesting opportunity it was for a women professional, recruited from an entry-level dead-end position at GM right after college, where Ford loved to steal employees. Everything I did at Ford for the next 11 years was a first for women employees there. So, first woman in its 2-year management training program, which was one of the requirements of the executive order. First woman to travel for the company, which at that time had 575,000 employees. Think about that. No women had traveled. First woman labor representative in the auto industry. And at that time, GM was the largest corporation. Ford was the 3rd largest corporation in the world. First woman main table bargainer, and that's a big deal in the auto industry. And first woman manager in HR. As importantly, I accomplished some other firsts that distinguished me in my career field of human resources. And why mention them? The first firsts had to do with me as a woman. The second group had to do with personal accomplishments as an HR professional. Peter Drucker described some of this in his book, Frontiers of Management, as exemplary performance. So there were some groundbreaking areas in HR with which I was involved, one of which was affirmative action reporting, which scared the Ford execs. Training across the country for auto dealership customer service, which was brand new. And those of you who've been in dealerships for service know what I'm talking about. And there were really no male or female norms for the job. Provided a lot of data-rich reporting, which was not a strong competency at that time for HR people. I had a reputation for risk-taking and whole company solutions, not just within the HR function. And I was willing to organize and lead a women's professional organization at Ford, which not only was a perceived threat to Ford, they actually considered us to have that possibility and threat of unionizing as women. I was also unwilling to accept the gender double standard even then, and I'll give you just a couple of little examples if you're dying to know. I have tons more. But I don't know that any of you have been in this situation, but you're with a male counterpart, perhaps someone in a heavier job than the one you have, and they compliment you on your clothes. Well, in my opinion, that's a little bit, it's nice. It's a little bit of a put down because I can compliment you on your clothes. So what I started to do was compliment them on their clothes when they complimented me on my clothes. And it was kind of, oh, thanks. Okay. I think at that time also, women only had a first name. We were girls versus Mr. Man. And I had techniques around that. Jill Pollock. So now, those of you who are on the Anschutz Medical Campus, if you go to a clinic, it's varied. Sometimes they'll say, Ms. Pollock, but they'll come out and say, Jill. I say, Pollock. They never again call me Jill. Think about it. So I was designated at Ford to have potential to the vice presidency, which I wanted. Ford and I shared responsibility for developing me, just as CU and you share that responsibility. So I was moving from a professional to a manager and took advantage of some experiential opportunities that distinguished me from my peers, and you'll hear me talk about that a little later. So I completed that 2-year management rotation. I finished my MBA because at that time, it was becoming a baseline differentiator for future roles. I worked a lot with the Ford VPs because there weren't too many of me. And so they became my coaches, sponsors, and mentors. I also became involved with external organizations, and I have an example that I'll give you in a minute. But before we get to that, let's think about 4 approaches that I developed and practiced in these first 2 stages of my Ford career. One is that I planned the career and my salary to mirror high potential men, and I tracked the progress in particular of one finance person, my own personal pace car, kind of going with the auto theme here, whose career path was most similar to mine. I told myself that I would stay at Ford until my progress fell behind his. Secondly, whenever I went into a new job, the first thing I did was sit down with my boss and talk about his, because he was always a man, expectations of my work. I did that by using a little visioning exercise like, at the end of my assignment here, what, in your opinion, will success look like? And those of you who've worked with me know that I still use that question. At the end of this journey, what will success look like? Thirdly, I did favors for the VPs, work-related ones. Because I was a rare commodity as a woman professional at Ford, I was invited to represent Ford all over the country. And I watched how the VPs acted, and I learned from the good and the bad. And the fourth, I took on odd assignments from the VPs. You know, recall I said I'd come back with an example. Well, one of the Ford execs volunteered me to be part of a community advisory group for program review at the University of Detroit, where I attained an MBA. So have any of you worked on external committees? Yes? Nod? Okay. If so, you know that the quality of membership in such committees can be spotty. The committee chair, who was the retired vice chairman of General Motors, was brilliant, and he liked my work, and he became a friend, and I performed for him on this particular assignment. Ultimately, he paved the way for my senior level community involvement until his death about 10 years later. Then something happened in the early 1980s that profoundly changed the direction of my career. I had hit the glass ceiling. My pace car guy had passed me. And 3 mediocre performing male HR professionals did too. My supportive boss took an assignment in Ford Australia. His replacement was a jerk. You don't have to raise your hand, but have any of you had that opportunity? I was frustrated and stalled. So I found some satisfaction leading on behalf of Ford, external committees of women professionals development, and an important conference in Detroit was sponsored by Wayne State University. We invited women from education, healthcare, government, and industry as speakers and participants. Stress management, then as now, was a big topic because we first were super women, carrying all women metaphorically on our backs. We asked Ford's new chief physician, Dr. Marjorie Peebles to speak on the topic. A tiny woman, maybe 5 feet tall, Dr. Peebles was a giant in healthcare. In her session at the conference, she walked to the front of the room and said, I was asked to talk about stress management. I don't really know what that is. I figure if you don't like what you're doing, don't do it. I don't remember anything else she said because I was just reeling because I had learned her story of firsts. In 1943, in an era of racial segregation, she earned her medical degree as the first African-American woman to graduate from Wayne State University's School of Medicine, and then went on to be the first Black woman to be chief resident at Detroit Receiving Hospital. She couldn't obtain admitting privileges at hospitals, however, and so formed with the late Dr. Eugene Schaeferman, one of the first interracial private practices to overcome that barrier. She became the first African-American woman chief of internal medicine at a large Detroit hospital. She was the first African-American woman clinical associate professor at Wayne State in the Department of General Medicine. And she was the first African-American and woman to serve as Ford's chief physician. Who was I to whine about hitting the glass ceiling in the shadow of her adversity and her accomplishments? I left the conference with, if you don't like what you're doing, don't do it, ringing in my ears. This was my second signal moment, or my aha moment in my career. The next day, I started planning my exit strategy from Ford. So let's recall those first signal moments. One is, be your own person. And two is, stop being in a career you don't like. I was a highly regarded HR professional in the auto industry, working for the third largest employer in the country. With my MBA gained knowledge, I could assess my worth and skills, craft a business plan, find partners and investment capital, test whether anyone would buy what I wanted to sell, and if so, form a company. So I did. I took 6 months to plan at night while still at Ford, and another 12 months after I resigned to prepare to enter the market of HR management consulting. I left Ford with care and good feelings. My partners and I opened the doors in 1984 with business from Ford and the U.S. State Department, and I entered my second career. So I was now at the top of the organizational pyramid as president of a consulting practice in Detroit and Washington, D.C. I had to learn quickly all the business functions that weren't HR. Now think about that for yourself as you've gone through various of your stages. To whom did I turn for advice in business development? My auto industry execs, other women professionals, other business owners, alumni of the University of Detroit, fellow board members at not-for-profit corporations. It was a great network. And I took on leadership roles with each professional group and board to expand my skills and also to expand my firm's market. The Small Business Association connection, by the way, led to a long-term engagement with the FBI, where we were the first women-owned firm to perform work for it. If you've noticed in my bio in the back, there's great cachet, having had top secret security clearance. I don't have it anymore, but what fun it was. My professional development over the next 16 years accelerated at a pace that would have been impossible at Ford in the 1980s and the 1990s. I honed my skills in negotiation and persuasion, marketing, organization analysis, report writing, problem identification and resolution. Clients were in all sectors, and they needed unique attention in order for my firm to be successful with them. Just as we work here at CU with different groups within our organizations. Management consulting is a tough field, though. I was on the road half of each month, and I got tired, both physically and mentally. My husband was ill. My business partner and I developed different life objectives. It was time for another career stage change, maybe one with a little more personal balance. The year was 2000, and I didn't have to fly like Superwoman quite so often. Many of my business clients were universities. Two of my linked specialties were working with people in career transition and conducting forensic audits of HR organizations in trouble. I was asked by one of the Michigan universities to analyze its HR organization for possible fraud and conversion of funds. And there indeed were problems, and some folks were fired. I was asked to run the HR organization on an interim basis as a consultant until a search could be completed. Unfortunately, it was a failed search. And I was sitting around with the CFO afterward, who noted that he wished he could find somebody like me, but just not pay my consulting rate. And I said, well, you know what? Maybe we can do a deal. And with that, the third career as a university chief human resources officer was launched. So let's take a few moments to summarize what happened across the stages of my career to that point. Learned and performed at Ford, rising to the top level possible at the time. Took the knowledge on the road and added other skills, knowledge, and reputation, but at some personal cost. And then I saw a way to parlay my organization turnaround specialty to a leadership role within a single client organization, and then moved ultimately to 5 different universities, who each came to me because I had a skill it needed. So, consider your own career to date. Are you learning, enjoying, and networking, both within and outside your own sphere of influence? Are you adding competencies that are uniquely yours to package and to demonstrate? Are you even thinking about your role in crafting your career? You're in charge, even if chance occurrences present opportunities for change. How do you recognize those opportunities? For me, the excitement of doing something new and different that would showcase what women leaders could accomplish was compelling. Boredom for me is a killer feeling, and one that I've learned to pay attention to. So now I'm in the last stage of my career. I am a university officer. I did become a vice president, which was an early goal, just not at Ford. Sometimes our goals don't occur on our initial planning timeline. I'm respected nationally among my peers. I didn't come to CU for a turnaround opportunity, although it later presented itself. I was recruited to be the Chief Human Resources Officer, and I agreed to make the change in part for family reasons. My only child lived in Colorado and had 2 small children. I wanted to be part of my grandchildren's lives. Second wave feminist superwomen mellow with time, it seems. I'm motivated by leadership possibilities. The new, the cool, the fun ways we can underpin the mission of the organization. But what was new and cool for CU? Let's put some of them into the context of 5 practices of exemplary leadership described by my favorite authors, Kouzes and Posner, from their book, The Leadership Challenge. First is model the way. Live your values. It's your behavior that earns respect, not your title, not my title. Second is to inspire a shared vision. Be excited about the future, unknown that it is. In healthcare, I led establishment and operation of a 60,000 participant healthcare trust for 3 employers, including CU. If you're on a health plan at CU, it's part of the health trust. That trust structure has saved CU over $50 million since 2011 without reducing employee benefits. The third is to challenge the process, experiment, and take risks. I initiated the rethinking process about how the CU retirement savings plans serve our employees and the retirees, recognizing that change could be noisy. We also amplified benefits for gender dysphoria. Fourth is to enable others to act, creating a climate of trust. My role as a vice president was to have my direct reports' backs. The president assigned me the responsibility for restructuring university information systems, the university-wide IT system, from one that fell over every 2 or 3 days, screwing up HR, finance, student, and research administration applications, to one that today is up 99.9% of the time. Fifth is encourage the heart, and probably of all Kouzes and Posner's admonitions around the practices of exemplary leadership, this is the one that strikes close to me, and that is to recognize the contributions and expect the best. My team designed and implemented the first employer-sponsored kids wellness program and the first comprehensive financial education initiative for university employees in the country. So my next opportunity lies ahead. Retirement. Retirement from full-time employment. Maybe we should just add to that. And guess what? I've planned for it. I have a bucket list. You can ask me later what's on it. I'm not afraid that I will become irrelevant if I don't have paid employment. I will probably consult a bit, but there is much to see and do with a different eye, and I look forward to it. How about you? What's your plan? I'll leave you with 6 admonitions drawn from my experience in the hope that you will choose to be intentional about the stages of your career and your life. One is, perform the heck out of everything you do. Mediocrity is not a differentiator. Take the high road in the face of adversity. The bad folks will be shown for what they are. Third is to find the human dignity in everyone. Serve them, particularly if you're in a leadership role. That's your job. Staff your organization with an inclusive group of people at all levels and from all backgrounds or orientations, and then listen to them. The folks will add a richness to the next level of excellence at CU. Fifth, be open to the unexpected opportunity for leveraging your competencies. Career paths are ever-changing, particularly in today's data and technology-rich world. And finally, have fun. There are too many cool things out there to waste the minutes of your life continuing to perform just a job. In the words of Dr. Peebles, if you don't like what you're doing, don't do it. A rewarding next stage of your career can follow. Thank you.